Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to the first Conservative Women's Network of 2024, and Happy New Year to all of you. I'm Michelle Easton, president of the Clare Boothe Luce Center for Conservative Women, and we're so happy to have you all here today. The Clare Boothe Luce Center began over 30 years ago with a mission to prepare and promote the nation's conservative women leaders, like our speaker. Our primary focus is young women in college, as well as promoting our best women leaders who are role models and teachers for the students. We have a really nice staff here at our headquarters and volunteer students all over the country. I want to quickly mention, we're looking to hire an in-person bookkeeper, not a remote worker, somebody here in the office. So if you or anyone you know would like to join our team as a bookkeeper helping us advance conservative principles and women leaders, let us know. Now, this lunch at Conservative Women's Network, we've been running it for more than 23 years. We gather together to hear conservative women leaders discuss critical issues and to meet with other conservative women and men over lunch. We wanted to do a special pro-life discussion this month to go with Friday's big, apparently snowy, March for Life here in Washington, D.C. So now I'm pleased to introduce our speaker. Longtime pro-life advocate and leader, Mallory Carroll, discussing why we are pro-life. She spoke for us at a CWN panel. It's a couple of years ago. It was right after the Dobbs decision. And you did such a great job that we've been wanting to have you back to speak again on life. Mallory served for more than a decade as the Vice President of Communications at the Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America Group, the nation's largest pro-life advocacy group. Mallory made many appearances for the SBA Pro-Life America, including on Fox News, on Newsmax, CNN, MSNBC, also a lot of radio broadcasts and print publications. She got great stories for SBA in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Politico, MSNBC, the New Yorker, and more. I bet they miss you. Her guiding philosophy when speaking out in the defense of unborn children and women, especially to biased pro-abortion media, is to always speak the truth in love. She graduated from Loyola University, Maryland in Baltimore, studying political philosophy and French. Je m'appelle Michelle. She first joined the pro-life movement and the Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America team in 2009 after teaching English in France. She and her husband, Mike, have a 1-year-old son, that beautiful angel in the back there, John, who's with us today, being held by her loving grandmother, his loving grandmother. And I know you have some friends here from Susan B. Anthony, and we welcome you all. And the great news is that Mallory is expecting another baby in May. These days, Mallory treasures staying at home with her son, and she and her family live in Virginia. Following today's talk, and we'll do some questions and answers, I hope you'll join us for some lunch right outside the room. Please join me now in welcoming Mallory Carroll.
It's such an honor to be here today. Yes, I've been really enjoying staying at home with John Colby, but just recalling so many wonderful memories at Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America and the incredible work that they do over there. Thank you to some of my former colleagues for being here today. One of the things that I was really glad at sort of the broad nature of this topic and sort of why are we pro-life? Because I found that in my years at SBA that I had to stop at least once a day and pause to consider the humanity of the unborn child at stake in every abortion decision and his or her mother. Not just the politics, the policy, my endless righteous indignation at the pro-abortion media that at times it was very difficult to work with them. But so the importance of pausing to consider the humanity of each little boy and girl and his or her mother struggling in an abortion decision perhaps at that very moment. And when I became pregnant with my first child, I was struck by how much more I even understood then the humanity of the unborn. But that happened after 13 years at working at SBA. So being a biological mother is by no means a prerequisite to understanding the humanity of the unborn child. And I see we have such great pro-life men in the room with us too. So thank you for being here. It's just a scientific fact that from the moment of sperm egg fusion, aka fertilization, that a unique human being begins to grow. And in 2021, there was a handful of surveys. One of them said that I believe it was 80% of Americans said they believe biologists are best in the best position to determine when life begins. So they asked biologists in 2021 what they thought about when life begins, and 96% confirmed that fertilization is the moment that a new human being begins to grow. Not sure what planet those other 4% are living on. And this gives a little bit of insight also into our Supreme Court Justice saying that she wasn't a biologist, making that very clear. But us in this room, we know that it doesn't take a biology degree to know that from the moment of fertilization, what is developing in a woman's womb post-fertilization is a human child. Biologically, it can't be anything else. It's not a cat, it's not a dog, and it's not a part of a human being. It's not just a hand or a liver. It's a full human being that simply needs time, nourishment, and a safe place to grow. And I want to pose the question, do not all of us fit this description? Not just when we were in our mother's wombs as embryos, fetuses, infants, etc., but now we are still growing. We still need nourishment and safety, and we rely on other human beings for all these things. I'm 38 years old. My mom drove me here today, and we rely on others, and even in some ways we impose on others. So this isn't such a foreign concept between the relationship between a mother and her growing unborn child, that there is a level of imposition. As the poet John Donne said, no man is an island. Martin Luther King also said something similar. He said, we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. So I really have been meditating a lot on the interconnectedness of all of our lives, and especially with the March for Life coming up and the topic of abortion being in the news, I think we should, just recall the basics. And I'm hoping to give you a few points to consider as you talk to others who perhaps don't agree with us. So the interconnectedness of our lives, we all have a lot in common with the unborn, and why shouldn't we? That's where we started, and in many ways, it's where we still are, and it's a degradation to us as grown adults that we degrade when we degrade the lives of the unborn by taking them in the womb. And this is an injustice that is totally unworthy of our nation and our culture. So for 50 years, another reason that it's important to talk about this now is obviously the March for Life coming up, but in a lot of ways, it's harder to be pro-life now than it has been for a long time. For example, I think that my communications colleagues are having a much more difficult time at this moment than I have the last 13 years when I was making the case for pro-life law and policy, just to, anything to pull us back from abortion on demand up until the moment of birth versus what we have now. If you think about it, for 50 years, really, we could only articulate our pro-life position without the ability to do much about it. What could we do? Our hands were tied, but our voices were still free to make the case. But the Supreme Court had instituted by judicial fiat one abortion policy for the entire nation, abortion on demand up until the moment of birth. The Dobbs decision, thanks be to God, changed all of that. and gave people through their elected representatives, as well as through direct democracy, as we've seen, the power to change law and policy. So we're in a live fire situation now, and that has changed the tone and the strategy on both sides, and especially in the general environment of the pro-abortion media, it's really changed how we're talking about these things. So we are at long last having these very real conversations in a particularly hostile environment with real legislative consequences and real consequences for unborn children and their mothers and for our communities. And so far, I think it's important to acknowledge that the outcomes, especially at the state level, have been really deeply disappointing. I mean, look at the results in some of the states where we've had ballot initiatives. We watched in horror as Americans have chosen, as opposed to it just being imposed by the court, chosen abortion on demand regimes rather than accept any limitations, any protections at all for unborn children. And we have to face the failures and the different reasons behind them with our eyes wide open and be prepared to speak to these failures to our neighbors and our friends and our doctors. Seeing a physical therapist, and that's all we talk about is abortion. It's crazy. She's just so curious for what the pro-life position is. So we have to be ready at any moment to talk about this. In some cases, we are having to combat pure callousness. The reality that there is a certain segment of our population that simply doesn't want to face natural consequences of human behavior. They want limitless sex without consequences rather than accept any limit on abortion, any protection for unborn children, whether that's even in the third trimester of pregnancy, when the baby can feel pain, etc. And then on the other hand, we are faced with an understandable and even natural aversion to human suffering that's being twisted to support abortion on demand and essentially infanticide and eugenics. So consider what just happened. The Kate Cox story in Texas is a really great example of this. This was national news for many weeks. In some ways, it still is. In this instance, we had a mother and a group of doctors who teamed up to try and eliminate the future suffering of a child diagnosed in the womb with trisomy 18. But their idea was to eliminate the person, the sufferer, not just the condition. And this baby, Kate Cox's child with trisomy 18, didn't deserve to die, simply because her parents and her doctors feared her future suffering. And again, to relate us to the unborn, imagine if any of our parents or our doctors decided our lives weren't living because of the suffering that we have faced and surely will face in the future. Meanwhile, in Massachusetts, there is a 6-year-old girl, Sojona Murphy, who's got trisomy 18 and she's thriving for all intents and purposes. Her mom, Heidi, was how to explain it, really pressured strongly to abort her. And then even after her child was born, was harassed essentially by doctors and medical personnel for allowing her child to live. But this beautiful family, the Murphy family, they believe that the length of a person's time on earth doesn't determine their value. And that's what I believe as well. And it's amazing when you pause to consider. So Sojourna's 6 years old. I'm sure many people in this room are familiar with Bella Santorum, the daughter of Rick and Karen. She was given days, weeks to live. That little girl is now 15. She's a teenager. And there was a woman a few years ago, I think she's in Oklahoma City, Megan Hayes is her name. She turned 40 years old. She has trisomy 18. So people living with this condition and others considered incompatible with life, they are making gains all the time. And their families, their doctors that are treating them, they are on the front lines of the next wave of human flourishing. And I think this is really, a beautiful area to focus on. This is another reason for us to be pro-life. What if we just ended every the life of every person who is suffering with some kind of challenge. I mean, that just seems silly, seems totally nonsensical. So we've got to feel really comfortable talking about these incompatible with life situations, alleged incompatible with life situations, because this is the way that the abortion lobby this is their focus, one of their primary focuses, and it's a way that both in the United States as well as internationally, they've been able to hoodwink, I think, a lot of what we would say are well-meaning people into supporting essentially abortion without limits. Another story that I really love talking about, excuse me, one of my heroes in Congress, former Congresswoman Jamie Herrera Butler of Washington State. So you may be familiar with this story, but during her second term in office, she found out that they were pregnant with their first child. And she and her husband were horrified when an anatomy scan revealed that their little baby girl had no kidneys. It's a condition called Potter syndrome. So the doctor said, you can either go across the street and schedule an abortion, or you can just wait to miscarry. And she and her husband refused to accept that this was the end of the line for their little baby girl. And so they ended up essentially having to beg hospitals in the DMV area to offer them another solution. And they finally ended up at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. And the doctors there came up with an idea. They said, we'll inject saline solution into the womb on a weekly basis to ensure that there's enough amniotic fluid that the baby's lungs can develop. So the kidneys, the amniotic fluid, and the lungs, this is all a big cycle that's all connected, especially in the later trimester, in those final weeks when the lungs are growing. And it was a very simple treatment. In fact, it's crazy because saline injections into the womb is actually part of an abortion procedure if, you do too much. But Abigail, her name, she was born in 2013. After her parents had been told there was absolutely zero chance that she was going to live. Zero chance. And she was treated with dialysis until she was big enough to receive a kidney, which she did from her dad. And I just think that that's so beautiful. So Potter syndrome has a treatment, as the Butler family will tell you. But if you Google Potter syndrome, Google will tell you that this is a terminal condition with no treatment whatsoever. This is horrible. Imagine the relief that parents receiving this negative fetal diagnosis would feel if they knew the truth. But instead, we have a anti-science, anti-human propaganda machine on the internet. And so this doesn't just affect the unborn. This affects us all. We're all worse off for a pro-abortion culture that ignores a proven effective treatment for an otherwise fatal condition. So we've got to keep fighting. It's not all bad news. Forgive me for focusing on the negative aspects. But in terms of the bright spots, my beloved alma mater, Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America, has been tracking all of the great things since the Dobbs decision. So nearly half the states, 24 states, have enacted some form of protections for unborn children and their moms. Last year alone, 32,000 more children, an estimated 32,000 more children were born because of these pro-life protections. And this is, of course, because of not only the laws, but the way that pregnancy centers and churches and these local pro-life safety nets have responded in such a heroic way to this moment in time. But as hard as we're working, opponents of life are working even harder. They are absolutely hell-bent on making sure that abortion and abortion culture is here to stay in a way even bigger than it was prior to the fall of Roe, because they want the people to choose it affirmatively rather than just have the courts impose it. They're using every tactic available to silence those that speak out for life, to mislead the public. They have a lot of money. They've been tackling ballot initiative after ballot initiative with very misleading ads. And of course, they are using institutions like the FDA to try and make sure that every mailbox, post office, pharmacy, etc., are actually abortion centers in our country. So we've got to keep fighting. Just to one final underlining of my main point. 1 Corinthians 12:25 says, "If one part of the body suffers, all the other parts suffer with it." Whether we know it or not, each of us is suffering personally because of abortion, whether that is because we've been impacted by an abortion decision directly, or we are simply missing out on a key relationship in our life because someone isn't here who should be. So I just want to invite you all to stay engaged and to remember that this isn't just a political or policy advocacy battle, but really it is a fight, a mission to heal our country and our world. Thank you so much. Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
Thank you. What a inspiring talk
Oh,
from
good. I'm glad.
a mother here. Let me ask first, if I can.
Sure.
It seems like we won this huge battle with
Yes.
Dobbs, and many of the people on our side seem so reluctant now to speak up.
Yes.
And I know how hard the other side is working, but there was a Wall Street Journal article this weekend about this timidity
Yes.
from pro-life people. Just, oh, we're just not going to talk about it. When their positions are so solid and so easy to explain.
Yeah. Yes, that's true. I mean, I think that we're really in a especially frustrating time with some of our elected representatives who, you know, could show up at the March for Life, give a nice talk about the reasonable limits that they wanted to pass. And now, I mean, it's the messiness of democracy that we have to have these conversations and have these debates. And there are, some states where there's going to be the possibility of stronger protections for the unborn versus places like, my home state of Maryland, where it's going to be a lot harder to pass stronger protections. So we are seeing a lot of, sort of shifting in our feet. And when I think we just need to be forthright with the American people. There's nothing wrong with saying, I support life from the moment of conception, from the moment of fertilization, here's why. And then saying what's feasible is, hashing this out. We want to educate people while we debate this and trying to ensure that the strongest protections are passed in each area that they can be, So what's going to be possible in Virginia or Arkansas is going to be different from Illinois or Maryland. That's why we also need federal legislation. And what's possible at the federal level, if we have strong leaders, is going to be something that a majority of Americans support, which is going to be most likely a limit on abortion after the point that the baby can feel pain, which is at least 20 weeks, if not 15. And so but we should be having these conversations because we're changing hearts and minds through the conversation.
Right. Strong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Stand up.
Yeah, we fought for this. So many of the senators who put Trump's Supreme Court justices on the court, who confirmed them, ran on pro-life platforms. Mm-hmm. We had these conversations prior to the fall of Dobbs, and we weren't shy about it then. So why be shy about it now?
Absolutely. We have a microphone here. If you would, Lindsay has a microphone. If you have a question, if you'd raise your hand. Oh, and here's one too, Catherine.
Oh, great.
If you'll call on people, and if you wouldn't mind giving your name and where you're from, because we tape this, so all the young women and others who want to hear this but couldn't be here today.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they want to hear your question.
Okay.
Oh. My name is Tracy. I am a friend and former colleague of Mallory's, and I wanted to ask, one of the things that SBA has specialized in is trying to change the narrative and flip the script back away from what the pro-abortion industry wants to talk about to what we want to talk about. And in this media environment, that's really challenging, but you have a lot of experience with that. So, do you think we can do it, and how?
Yeah, there's so many challenges. So when in the okay, around 2010, the pro-life movement was sort of just starting to be seen as politically relevant, and we were mainly talking to political reporters, and we were showing them the polling that shows, like, here's where Americans are actually thinking about abortion. This is the type of policy that we're trying to get legislators to support. Here's how we're trying to leverage this in the political environment. And it was a it was a novelty at the time, and I think that that novelty really was sort of a hook for a lot of political reporters, political journalists, people who like really savvy sort of like thinkfluencers on the right and the left, that they were both paying attention to this. And now, you know, they sort of they've seen the efficacy of what we've been able to do. And there's been such crazy turnover in the press. And we've got a lot of young reporters, a lot of Gen Z people who have such a totally different worldview. So this is like an added complication that you are not even using some of the same term. Like there's no common definitions. So it's especially tricky. But yeah, I think we just have to keep. I think the power of storytelling is where we need to turn by focusing in on the Bella Santorums of the world, Sojourner Murphy, you know, these babies that they were babies. They're outside born people, and that in a culture that is prioritizing emotional satisfaction and you know, feelings above anything else, above reason, above consistent moral philosophy, that we should really be continue to turn to stories. I think this is something that SBA has been doing a good job. Not to, I'm a little biased, but I know that with the Her Plan project, so the plan stands for Pregnancy, Life, and Assistance Network, getting stories in the local media about the pro-life safety net, the church groups that are sponsoring individual mothers and their babies who are having baby showers, the car dealerships that are donating vehicles to single moms, and sort of the interconnectedness of you know, the food pantries with churches, with pregnancy centers, with local social services, and bringing that information to the public so that more people know about it. It serves a dual purpose. It reaches women who are abortion vulnerable and maybe encourage learning about you know, information that's learning through the press what's out there, what resources are out there, and then also encouraging pro-life people and non-pro-life people to also know about those resources, even if they're not going to need to avail themselves of them. It's kind of long-winded. So that stories, yeah.
Thank you so much. My name is Dina Bass Williams. I'm here with my sister and partner in crime, Dee Dee Bass Wilbon, and we are from Bass Public Affairs. Uh, I love that you're talking about stories. And one of the things that we, just kind of as consumers of media, we run a communication shop, but
Yeah.
just as a consumer of media, we are always disheartened when we see, obviously, the mainstream media, but also television and movies just automatically assuming that people don't share our worldview on
Yeah,
this
yeah.
issue. And whenever we see a little glimmer of a TV show or a scene that celebrates life, and usually it's accidentally they celebrate life,
Yeah.
like we'll screenshot it and clip it and put it all over our social media. But my question for you is, like, this is an amazing policy conversation. It's and I would imagine that not many of us in this room are filmmakers or creatives in that space. But how do we, as conservatives who understand and value life, like how would you suggest we begin to infiltrate entertainment and in that space? Because like I feel like that is where we lose ground. And in a previous life, my life was involved in film, but that's so distant now. I just wonder, like, how would you advocate? And that's where we reach these younger generations. But how would you
Well,
say
I
impact culture now?
was in the chorus in You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown in middle school. And then my freshman year of high school, I tried out for the play and got like some no name character. And I went home and said, "Ah, this just isn't for me." So I'm not the best person to ask about infiltrating the entertainment industry. Um, I do think that I am really encouraged by some of the sort of the broader gains that have been made by Christians, like some stuff like The Chosen. You know what I mean? That's really, really well filmed, really well done. Anne and Philly McAleer have done such an amazing job on the Gosnell movie. It was a really extraordinary idea to put together like a true crime story, not to sell it as like a abortion advocacy movie, but this is like a true crime issue. I think that was a bright spot. I don't have any particular ideas. I just agree with you that it's something we need to do. And anytime they accidentally make the case for life, to call them out on it and to draw attention to it. There was among my friend group, one of my claims to fame is that the Broadway singer Kristen Chenoweth, she retweeted me once. Yes. But she had this Hallmark Christmas movie a few years ago, and we never had done this before, but we're like, let's have a girls' night, watch this Christmas movie. We're drinking wine, we're having a great time, we're watching this movie, and like 3/4 of the way through it, I said, this is totally pro-life. This is an adoption story. This is making the case for. So I got my phone out. I had like 3 friends fact check it. I was like, does this make sense? Before I sent it out. She retweeted me, said that it was told from her gut. She said, thank you, told from my gut. And like Daily Signal and Daily Caller and a few other of the conservative things, they did little posts about it. They're like, Mallory Quigley had Susan B. Anthony list. Kristen Chenoweth. It was very exciting. But it like stuff like that I think is awesome for the general like Janes and Joes who are just secular, not really thinking hard about this issue, but they're consuming popular culture. There's something else I'm thinking of recently, like I forget if it was a music video or gosh, I don't know. If Taylor Swift marries Travis Kelce and they have a baby right away, like this is going to be great news for the future of America. Sorry, just some musings. I agree with you. It's really important. Maybe you should think about going back into entertainment somehow, but it is definitely needed. We can't cede any ground.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I'm Elizabeth Hensley from Herndon here, and love this program and all the sessions you hold. With this last decision, I know the left has really used young women who have been brainwashed that their rights are being pulled away by this decision. They no longer have the right to abortion. And I feel like they've made more hay out of it to get out the vote. And I look at all these young women, and I've got to say, I'm a baby boomer. I too, when I was in college, didn't think much about if I had gotten pregnant, would I have kept the baby? It was almost automatic, drilled into my head. I grew up in New York, drilled in my head, you get an abortion. And I know for this group that probably sounds horrible, but I think I represented a lot of people and a lot of people today. When I go and I've gone to the colleges my kids go into, I noticed in the ladies' room, you close the stall door and there's information on how to have an abortion and where to go. There's nothing about saving the baby. There's nothing about resources for you out there. So I guess my question is, we are having young women brainwashed that they're losing their rights. They don't even think about the other option. And you've said some things about this, but what more could be done to help reach all these young women who really have just believed this is their core right? They're horrible people trying to steal them of their right to life, to work, and all
Yeah.
those things.
Yeah.
So long-winded question.
Yeah. So a few thoughts. I think that there's sort of two segments of young women. There is like a sort of privileged, you know, college class of people that can afford to go to college, who are, you know, throwing hundreds of thousands of dollars away on useless liberal pro-abortion propaganda. And a former colleague in the movement, Kristen Hawkins at Students for Life, is doing an amazing job traveling to these college campuses to call out this agenda and debate one-on-one with some of these pro-abortion students. I think oftentimes a lot of the like really crazy stuff that we're seeing on social media in reaction to that is it's theater. It's street theater. And these girls, I mean, if you get into some of the culture and behavioral surveys of this younger generation, they're not having sex, they're not getting pregnant. Like they just are, they're being really gross with, you know, fetal development dolls and eating them, and, you know, being really just what's the word, provocative. Then you have low income abortion vulnerable women who are not getting the same type of brainwashed ideology. You know, they're not in school. And that's where I think programs like the movement has been aware for a long time coming, the need to beef up not the pregnancy resource centers per se, because they're already doing like a really fantastic job, but the drawing the lines between the public and the private resources, and all the reasons why a woman may be seeking an abortion. She's not necessarily, you know, an abortion vulnerable woman in Georgia, rural Georgia, is not necessarily like, you know, claiming it as a badge of honor that she's going into the Planned Parenthood there. She's in an abusive relationship. She's missing out on financial resources. So something like the Her Plan Project is looking into, okay, what are the legal resources available for abortion vulnerable women? What are the mental health resources that are available? Tying that to the pregnancy centers and the church food pantries, et cetera. And somebody who does a lot of work on this, actually, I mean, well, she does a lot of work on everything, is Abby Johnson, and her pro-love ministries. And she's really advocating for a sort of caseworker model, so that a mom enters the pro-life safety net and she's got somebody who can help direct her to, all right, you need help getting out of this tricky relationship. Maybe you're married, it's an abusive relationship. Okay, we need some legal support. You also need, you know, help connecting to whatever is available in terms of government resources. And then you need childcare because you've got to get to work. So connecting to all the different spokes on the wheel that is the pro-life safety net. And I really think that that's going to be that's the way we're going to save lives among the abortion vulnerable population. And then to the earlier question, you know, like continuing to fight for a voice in media and fight for a voice in academia. It's a long-term strategy to be present and to be showing an alternative and being normal and not, you know, just going crazy. I think some of this stuff is going to burn itself out with the trans issue and there was this crazy article in the Wall Street Journal the other day just about like polyamorous relationships. Like, I'm just hope maybe it's the sunny, like the Pollyanna in me that's just like, this can't last very long. But I think that stuff is getting just so weird and violent and gross on the pro-abortion side that normal people, where we have a chance to change hearts and minds, they're going to be deterred. I hope that answers your question. And then after up here.
Okay. Hi. I think one thing that we can do is to be really well informed about what things are available in our churches and in our communities and nonprofits for women who are in this decision-making process. There's an awful lot out there, and there are an awful lot of people, some of them are friends and colleagues, who are not aware of those things. They just plain don't know that those resources are there for these poor women, and they shouldn't have to, have a child born into poverty and ill health and all of that. So I think the more we are informed, and then we can bring that up in casual conversation or dinner, whatever, just let people know and say, hey, did you realize, I've been involved, yada, yada. Spread the word that way. And then I've had an off the wall thoughts about things for a long, long time, and I've never heard it mentioned anywhere. And that is, how often do we consider what God has sent that hasn't been born, as far as talent and healing and all these people and the gifts that they may have had to share with the world, and it hasn't happened. And I don't know how, if any of you have ever thought about that, or any discussions about pro-life have mentioned that. I just think it's amazing, and I don't know how. It's a very subjective kind of thing. I don't know if there's a way you could work that into thoughts about abortion.
Yeah, I mean, that's at the close of my remarks. I think that's something we all should be considering and bringing up in conversation. Imagine we're all suffering. We don't know exactly how it is that we're suffering, but surely that there are 50 million people missing since the Roe decision, and what impact those individual lives would have had. I think that's a really important point to bring up in individual conversations with people who are not pro-life. Like, what are we missing out on? And to your earlier point, like, absolutely, we all have spheres of influence. And if we are involved in a particular pro-life ministry, we should absolutely make sure that all of our friends, all of our, anybody who will listen knows about it. Because they, in turn, they can go out and spread that message. So we all have spheres of influence. Consider who is within your reach and evangelize them on the issue. Very important. Yes.
There is so much I want to say about this. I'm bursting. However, I'll try to contain myself. I've been around this question since the 60s, and I'm a nurse, and I've been there for miscarriages and abortions. And I used to refuse to scrub on them in the OR because of my feelings about it. And people would always say, "Are you Catholic?" And no, I just think you shouldn't do this.
Yeah.
And I would be in a room, I would not go in a room where they were doing them, but I could hear what was happening and things like that. And I always hesitate to say any details because it's so awful. And you never know who's had an abortion, and you don't want to hurt anybody with it, And I was in journalism school in the 70s and wrote a paper on abortion, preventing abortion, and what it came back to was, how do you teach teenage girls how not to get pregnant? And birth control was the topic of this, because I asked a friend who worked in an abortion clinic, who are the patients that are coming in there? And they were teenage girls in high school. Now, this wouldn't apply today so much, but at that time, it wasn't as allowed. You weren't allowed to, walk around pregnant and have a baby out of wedlock.
it was really looked down upon, you know, in my
Yeah.
generation certainly, and up into the 70s. And so it came to, if you have high school girls going in for abortions, then how do you get them to get birth control before they're going to get pregnant? And so this was a whole paper on advertising birth control and television and things like this. And 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 this is what frustrates me, because every time I hear people talking about it, they don't back up a step and talk about, we have birth control, and how do we get women to use it and to say, stop, I need to use birth control. Because what would be the statistics? How many could you prevent? How many pregnancies could you prevent because someone stops by a drugstore and gets a condom on the way to the parked car? You know, and that was the basis of my paper.
Yeah.
You know, and how do you get people to do this? Then the other side of the coin is, I'd also written an article on the first 2 months of a fetus and how it changes from a ball of cells, which girls are told, oh, it's just a ball of cells. How does that change into a human being type thing, right? And
Like
well,
looking like
but
one.
so I did this whole article on just those first 3 months. And I don't know if these statistics are still true, because I wrote this a number of years ago. The 7th day after conception, there's an indentation into that rectangular shape that is going to be the mouth. On the 14th day, the first heart cell is beating. You get one heart cell, right? It's beating on the 14th day.
Yeah.
And so you have this
Oh,
entity
yeah.
there, you know. So I thought having sonograms and seeing the baby would really be helpful in changing this. And so I guess my question is, who are the people that are getting abortions? Is there an age group or a demographic that is higher than other people? It used to be high school girls, but maybe it's different now. And have sonograms and seeing the baby in the early phases of development, has that reduced them?
Yes.
And the third point is, I was at Shady Grove Hospital one time, and there's an abortion clinic on the grounds there, because Maryland or Montgomery County decided that you had to have your abortion clinic within so many feet of a hospital. And I remember one of the nurses saying they had 2 deaths at the abortion clinic. And what are the statistics on deaths, and how do we talk about the dangers that are with that? So that's
A few things. Voyageoflife.com, a beautiful website put together by voyageoflife.com. Incredible website put together by the Charlotte Lozier Institute, which is the pro-life alternative to the Guttmacher Institute. Has an gorgeous animation of the development of a baby from fertilization through to birth, and talks about some of those, like beginning to taste, showing a preference for right or left-handedness, and that happens all so much earlier than we really would imagine. So that's a great resource. Yes, I do believe that there is research that shows that seeing the unborn child with an ultrasound is one of the number one ways to change an abortion vulnerable or an abortion-minded woman's decision to get her to choose life, and which is why we have mobile ultrasounds, and the pregnancy centers make a big deal of getting an ultrasound right away. I don't have them off the top of my head, but I would imagine that what's the name? I would imagine that the Lozier Institute has some research on this, as well as what's the name of that research group that does a lot of the ads for pregnancy centers. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, Human Coalition. Yes, Human Coalition would know. And yeah, I mean, I think in the year of our Lord 2024, that people who don't have an awareness of birth control, I don't think that that's the reason. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, birth control isn't always effective, and then I think also that there's a lot of these, I mean, most of the news since the Dobbs case, they've really focused on these negative prenatal diagnoses. The New York Times had this incredible expose about the number of false positives of some of these early diagnostic tests. Like whether or not the baby's going to have Down syndrome, for example. And people are making decisions about whether or not to have an abortion based on this data, which is incorrect something like 60% of the time. So I think that's one of the reasons that I mean, the life and health of the mother, alleged concern, the life of the fetus, the life of the child, and what's going to be what challenges parents are willing to accept for their children. I mean, that's been the dominant narrative in the media, is that the abortions are happening because of these negative prenatal diagnoses. But I know for sure Lozier has research, and maybe I can connect with Michelle to connect with you to get you some of that information about why abortions are taking place. But yeah, I don't think it has anything to do with lack of knowledge of birth control. Yeah.
And that's what I was, writing about really, was that when I wrote this paper, I could hardly say the word condom.
It was
And people-
too taboo.
I'm very old, and some people don't remember those generations. And I was living in Atlanta, and I called a radio station to see if they would advertise condoms. Never. You would never say that out loud.
Yeah.
And so it's a very different world because about birth control, although the pill was available.
Yeah.
But in this day and age, I just don't understand about the lack of birth control use, But anyway.
Sure. That sounds great. Yeah.
Forgot my name last time. It was Sandy. One of our recent people at this symposium who wrote Adam and Eve After the Pill. in
Mary
her-
Eberstadt.
Yeah, in her book, she points out that there are a lot more abortions now because of failed birth control. It's not that people aren't using it, it's their failure, and then they resort to abortions because of that. So that's
Yeah.
mine.
My sister's looking at me like, oh my gosh, she's going to say something that's going to be forever. But I just want to say, I was telling this young lady back here that for me, I have a 16-year-old daughter and a 22-year-old son. And I just think as Christians, we don't talk enough. We don't speak up, and we need to speak up. And whether it starts in the church or wherever, but we need to speak up and not be afraid to say what we feel and what we believe. And I think that, things could change. But I think we just need to speak up. Everyone else gets to say and speak what they want to say, whether it's LGBTQ or poly, blah, 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 whatever it's called. We need to be able to speak up and say exactly what we feel and feel confident, and don't get embarrassed or nervous that someone is going to cancel you or say that you're a bad person or whatever. Be confident and just say and abortion is wrong, period. Plain and simple. It's just wrong. And if we do that, and if we do it more, and my sister knows I shoot from the hip, sometimes I have to ask for forgiveness at the end, but we need to speak up, plain and simple. That's what I think.
And empowering our children to speak up too.
Exactly. Right. And let them know that it's okay, exactly. That, and young girls or whatever, whether their parents need to talk to their kids and not just assume, oh, my daughter's not doing this, my son's not doing this. Have conversations. I talk to my daughter. I listen to her. I go through her phone. It's my phone because I pay for it. So, you know what I mean? We have to be open and have conversations with our kids, with our 22-year-olds and our 16-year-olds. And so in my house, we do.
That's one of the things we do here at the Luce Center, these pictures of the young women on the walls. Some of them are there, but a lot of them need more courage and confidence to give their point of view, to defend life. And people like you helping out, it's a wonderful thing. Thank you so much. What a great talk. And we have a little present for you.
Thank you.
This is our limited edition coffee mug here with the famous Clare Boothe Luce saying, what is that?
Yes, courage is the ladder on which all the other virtues mount.
Because you can know everything in the world, but if you don't have the courage and the confidence to speak up and to try to persuade people, you have a lot of courage. Thank you so much for bringing your mom and your little one. and we can talk informally over lunch outside. Thank you very much.